Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Brian Wagner, Chief Architect of Prodigio RTS. Today we're going to talk about TradeOptics and TradeVision. So should be a little interesting chat today because I'm going to give you a sneak preview into the developments that we're working on and the kinds of things that you'll be able to do with this system. As always, this video chat will be archived on the website www.prodigiorts.net under the section Video Archives. You can join us here every week at 12 o'clock Eastern, 11 o'clock Central, and we always talk about the Prodigio platform and Wizard Lab, what you can do with the platform, insights onto the kind of work that we're developing, and the ultimate goal of Prodigio Wizard Lab, in brief, is to provide you with a suite of robotic and automated trading tools. Prodigio is really unlike anything else that's out there today in the fact that Prodigio features Wizard Lab, a drag and drop user interface that allows you to create strategies for robotic deployment and trade automation using a simple drag and drop interface. It's very easy to get started with Wizard Lab. There's a lot of videos in these archives because we basically record all of these shows. We keep them out there so that they're available so that if you miss one you can catch up on it, or if there's a topic of interest you can go back and review. But you don't really need to know a whole lot to get started with Prodigio Wizard Lab. And our focus is on providing tools for you to be able to get right in, walk through the 4 steps of Wizard Lab rule building, run some back tests, and start to deploy these live. Follow us on Twitter. On Twitter we are twitter.com/wizardlab. And in order to get Prodigio, it is offered exclusively by Thinkorswim and TD Ameritrade. So you need to request activation by sending in an email into support@thinkorswim.com with the subject line Prodigio activation. Make sure to include your username and your account number, and Prodigio will activate on your Thinkorswim platform. You launch the Prodigio button under the Trade tab, and Prodigio will run as a separate application. Any questions can be sent in to prodigio@thinkorswim.com, or just join us here in the chat during the day. And typically we have someone in the chat available to answer questions, especially if you have a question about strategy building or certain aspects of the system, etc. Someone's usually here to answer those questions. Also, join us on the forums on the prodigiorts.net website. So the topic of today's chat is about TradeOptics and TradeVision. And I want to start by taking a look at the TradeVision tab. There's a lot to be said about the TradeVision tab, not only for what's already here, but for the direction that we are taking this. In the next development cycle of this platform, and we're constantly trying to add trade idea generation content and other tools that you can use to automate various aspects of your trading strategies. In the next phase, we're extending this TradeVision. There's still a lot of work to be done, but the idea is we're generalizing the scanning functionalities of the system. So, as a brief introduction, Prodigio as a robotic trading tool, it features a tab called TradeVision. And this groups together a couple things related to scanning the market for various events, for movement, for things that should be alerting to you activity or interesting things that are going on in the market. The first frame inside the TradeVision is your standard market advancers and decliners view. And this is set up to provide some intelligent filters to provide a good representative view of the relevant stocks that are moving up and moving down. Now, I say relevant view because there's a lot of symbols being traded on the market, and a lot of these symbols, some of them are pink sheets. There's a lot of pink sheet stocks, or there's a lot of symbols that have very low volume, are not actively traded. And the movement on those stocks, particularly if you are a swing or a day trader, they're of less interest to you than the movement of stocks that are genuinely traded and have significant movement on the market. And so I was looking at some of the results in this advancers decliners before, and to give you an idea of what I mean, I'm looking at this view and I have it sorted by percent movers. This view is constructed by performing scans on the broad market and finding stocks that meet a certain volume requirement and stocks that have a certain price requirement movement. So let's take a look at Triple E here. And what you'll notice on Triple E is that the volume, it has a fairly healthy volume. This is not a frequently traded stock, at least in the past few days. And what you should notice, if I scroll back in time, the volume was much more lightly traded, and you can see a lot of these dojis on this this chart. And then all of a sudden, there's kind of a rush of volume. There's a rush of interest. That's really indicating that something significant is happening on this stock, at least today, or within the relative recent movement. And this manifests in some price movement. You see a spike in volume, and you see a spike in direction. This is a stock of interest because the percent movement, which it has, I believe it was a 15% gain since yesterday, is accompanied by a significant thrust in volume. And so this is a stock of interest. This stock is, in my opinion, more interesting than a pink sheet stock that has a 50% gain. For example, if you have a penny stock or a pink sheet that's worth $4 a share, and now there's a little bit of interest, and now it's worth 6 cents a share. It was worth 4 cents a share, now it's worth 6 cents a share. That would be a 50% move, but that's probably much less relevant in terms of what's going on in the market as this stock, Triple E, is today. TradeVision, we kind of have these heuristics set up so that it provides you a good representation of things that combine both movement and significant volume. So here's something on OPWV where the gain is caused by a very large gap, and it's an intraday gap. You notice that this 5-minute bar starts at 950. The point is that these scans are subject to parameters. And with the first view of Prodigio, we tried to get a good representative view that has some interesting volume characteristics and interesting price movement so that it becomes a very good starting point to find stocks of interest. And according to the broad market direction, you might want to make plays on these stocks depending on your trading strategy. These lists are really just the top 20 movers in the advancing side and the declining side. And what this brings me to is what's interesting about how we're going to expand this. Those parameters, these rules that I discussed, they're heuristics based and they're kind of internal. We try to pick numbers that are representative of the market and reflect significant movement. But what we're creating is a scanning system which leverages the power of Wizard Lab's study engine. Now, if this is your first time looking at Prodigio, Prodigio features this Wizard Lab, which I briefly talked about before. And the idea, I can open a pre-built, or one of these strategies, or rules actually, that I had built prior. You create a schematic which defines the logical flow of data. So in other words, OHLCs come in a system and you tell the system what to do with those OHLCs. In this case, it's calculating a 3-period ADX technical analysis study, and it's going to compare that for crosses against another ADX. So this is just a really simple rule that when the 3-period ADX values cross the 14-period ADX values, just like you would see on a chart, this cross study is going to fire signals. And it's as simple as that. This is all drag and drop. You really just connect these outputs into inputs by dragging and dropping, and that's all there is to building rules. You combine those rules and strategies. You know, here's a BB squeeze strategy, for example, where we combined some rules and some orders in order to create trading automation. It's very easy. You know, you just take one of the rules that you built and you drop them in place. And I need more room down here, actually. Oh, I have BB squeeze on here. Let me close that out. There we go. And you parameterize things such as how the order prices are supposed to be sent, etc., etc. You can run back tests on these strategies. And the backtest system is very interesting because it shows you how your strategy performs, and you can hit the chart button and plot and see how, you know, your rules and your strategies are performing over time, what it's doing, etc. Tabulate results and all that. And then finally you go and deploy. And we're going to be focusing on the TradeOptics today because this is your real-time signal queue available in Prodigio that shows you a tabulation of all of these scans that you do on a small symbol list. So the way that you work with Wizard Lab right now, you create the strategy and you create a list and you say, I want to scan for these conditions on that list. Well, these lists, and even if I create a list, you'll notice that these are kind of a small representation of the broad market. The broad market has many thousands of symbols. These symbol lists tend to be small. And this is done intentionally for a multitude of reasons, but this actually helps you control the range of signals that you get. Well, what we're doing is we're taking this approach, this Wizard Lab scanning approach, and we are generalizing it into the concept of TradeVision. What this is going to allow you to do is set up, via very simple, almost form-fill user interfaces, the types of scans that you want to be able to perform on the broad market. What that will do is that will create your symbol list. So, for example, on my market watch, I'm really looking at two different symbol lists here. I'm looking at my market advancers and my market decliners. Each one of these lists is composed of 20 different symbols, and those lists are changing as the dynamics of the market change. So this is the idea behind a scan. TradeVision is your scanning tool. And the first scan that you've got is something that's looking at all the symbols on the market, and it's cherry picking those which have specific satisfactory parameters according to what you're looking for. The advancers and decliners are the ones that we pick, just like if you go to any other source and you look at their advancers and decliners lists, those lists are subject to criterion, or the parameters of the scan. And different lists will have different criterion. So for example, I believe we are using, I think it's a $300,000 minimum volume requirement. There's a criterion that and it changes, but all of these different scans have different criterion, and they tend to sort based on percent move. That helps you avoid the things that happen at the micro scale when you're looking at pink sheets or penny stocks, and you have these penny stocks that have a 1,600% move because it went from 3 cents up to 48 cents. That's just a very large move, and it's not as significant as the stocks that are actively traded. In this build that I'm talking about the TradeVision, we are incorporating the market fundamentals. And so you will be able to set up scans, and you will be able to craft Wizard Lab rules and strategies using a broad range of market fundamentals. And that includes things like earnings per share, PE ratios, etc. Market capitalization, which is basically the market cap. Very important when you are analyzing the behavior of the market. These are all going to be available in the next build. So as far as MarketWatch is concerned, this is very simple. It's just something very useful that you can check in on every day, and provides you a good range of motion so that you can kind of see. Now I look at these volume movements, right? Here's ANX, has 2 million shares traded today, so that looks like an interesting stock. And something's going on where since yesterday we have a surge of interest. It's probably moderately easy to get fills on this stock today. In the last 5 minutes it traded around 14,000 shares. And this looks like, I'm not making recommendations obviously. This could be moving up. You don't know. But when you're analyzing the market, this TradeVision is a very useful tool, and the decliners as well, especially if you tie this into the market direction. Right now we're kind of bullish on the day, just slightly, ever so slightly bullish. Pretty good, pretty good. So personally, I would be more interested in the advancers, but you should also take a look at the decliners, especially for stocks that are inversely related to the market. Now here's a gap down, and if you're a gap trader, you probably could have made a nice play on this. Notice what happens on this stock with the LTXC on the gap down. Here's that 10 o'clock reversal that tends to happen during day trading. 10 o'clock seems to be a very important time during the day, and in Wizard Lab, as just as a quick little tip, you can always go into the rule builder and you can create rules based on time by going to the time window. So this is just a little aside, but if I use the today study, I can use today after and I can type in 10 o'clock. And this becomes a logical value. See this TF? That means it's going to fire a signal. It's going to give me a yes or no answer if today's after 10 o'clock. So I could easily tie this into my rule here by going to my logical operators and dropping an AND condition. AND means both things have to be happening at the same time. So it's saying I've got to find my ADX signal, but I also have to be after 10 o'clock. And that's how simple it is. But that chart just reminded me 10 o'clock is a very good inflection point. Maybe on a bullish day you would be looking for a reversal, and if you played the gap into the extension, you could have made, this is a perfect example where you could have been short and you could have flipped it around if you're a day trader. But again, this TradeVision, it kind of clues you in on some relevant things that are happening. Very useful. Now you can always collapse this, and these panels, as I expand and collapse them, provide me with views of other scans. And here's the other primary scan under the TradeVision tab. Pivots. Pivots are an extremely important part of not only day trading but also swing trading. Pivots, if I were to sum up what a pivot point was in just ever so many words, I would say that a pivot point is a relative location of interest in price movement. Now, there's a lot of loaded words in there. I say relative and point of interest. Let's just take a look at the pivots on the Qs. So our first view is about the key pivots. And key pivots picks some relevant stocks for futures. So it shows the futures symbols. It shows market sectors such as the equity tradable funds for the S&P 500. That's SPY. Here's the diamonds on the NYSE. QQQ on the NASDAQ. Here's the Russells, the iShares for the Russell, and etc. There's a lot of others in here. You'll notice, there's a GLD, GDX for gold, etc. There's also some cash indices here, right, where they just talk about the raw indices. But if I just pull up the pivots on the Qs, right, I get my chart, and I can always double-click this tab here. That's going to expand Chart Trader Pro so that it fills the whole window. And I was looking at an ADX, so I can kind of just drop that. I can minimize volume. You can always hide volume. You've got settings over here on the Chart Trader Pro. You can always hide volume if you want. I'm just going to leave it on. But if I go over here, I can actually extend the y-axis. And I'm just dragging this, and it's changing my perspective so that I can see where the pivots are. And here's where the primary pivot point is, right here, PP. It's showing me relative ranges of interest in price movement. If I scroll back, I can see why these price movements are relative. It depends heavily on the trading activity of the prior day. Now, if you want an in-depth analysis of pivots, I recommend you check out the Shadow Trader broadcast. Shadow Trader is on every day. It's I'm sure a lot of you are coming from Shadow Trader, so this is old hat for you. But if you really don't listen to it during the day, it's a fantastic broadcast where they really give you insight on play-by-play of what's going on during the day. Those guys do a great job. They're over in the Shadow Trader room right here in Thinkorswim chat. The range of the prior day movement defines kind of the interest points for the next day. And there's a lot of thought put into the pivot points. For example, we know that the markets move up and down, right? We know that there's these channels of price movement, but they don't stay in those channels forever. So here's yesterday's price movement. It's wrapped up in, you see these vertical bars that delineate the days. Here's yesterday's price movement, and if I scroll back and I make sure that I'm on 9:30, okay, so here's actually the start of the prior day. The channel, and if I were to draw lines out here, create some horizontal lines, and I'm going to record, this is the high price of the prior trading day. You see that happened at about 15:35 in Eastern Time, and I can extend left, and I can configure this, and I can make it thicker. So I'll drag this out, I'll increase the line width. Here's my high point on yesterday, and I'll put out another line at my low point of yesterday. Now I have to be careful here, right, where it's probably this movement down. There was a little bit of volatility from the open. Again, you see what time that is? That's 10 o'clock. See, look at what's happening at 10 o'clock. We get a large movement down, and all of a sudden, price takes off, and this is the low of the day at 10 o'clock. This tends to happen. And you shouldn't make a trading strategy that only looks at 10 o'clock time. It should always be coupled with a series of filters and triggers. And let's make that the same or similar color. Might be this color. 10 o'clock tends to be an important inflection point. This is the range of trading on yesterday. And you'll notice that range of trading on QQQQ, it's very broad. There's 3 Qs. They changed that on us, actually. That was fun for the developers because us as developers, we use certain symbols a lot in debugging, and one of those is QQQQ, and they changed the symbol on us, so that was fun. But anyway, 3 Qs for the NASDAQ ETF. The pivots are defined by the range of movement, and these definitions are based on a couple concepts. Number one, the pivot point is always typically in the middle of the channel. It's typically in the middle of the channel. It's weighted according to nuances that happen in the market, and all of these formulas, they kind of reflect that knowledge in the market. There's differences between the growth of stocks and the fall of stocks. If you've I've talked to quite a few of these guys that do technical trading and technical strategies, and they have told me that stocks will climb, but when they fall, the rate at which they fall is usually a higher rate than the rate at which they climb. So it's very interesting. You can kind of tie this into your trading. This happens right here. Notice, right at 10 o'clock. See this huge red bar? It just drops, and then it proceeds to climb again. This rate of climb, now this is pretty steep, but if I look at the long term, it's generally climbing up, but when it does fall, it falls rather steeply. This is what they tell me, just another observation. But the pivot points take these things into consideration, and you can look up the formulas online, specifically the Shadow Trader pivots. Those formulas are available on shadowtrader.net, the website, under the glossary. They give you the full definitions of how these pivots are calculated, and they kind of take these things into consideration. But the pivot point is generally about in the middle of the range of trading activity. Now this is based on other concepts such as typical price. That's when you take high, low, and close and divide it by 3. And there's a lot of reasons why typical price is relevant. A lot of the studies created by Wells Wilder 30 to 40 years ago take all these things into consideration. But the support and resistance are built by measuring different price thresholds in the typical price in order to give you ranges that trading activity is generally interested in. Now these are not predictions, right? That's very important. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm talking about 10 o'clock Eastern Time. This is actually 9 o'clock Central. We're kind of hung up on the time zone for the NYSE. So whenever you refer to me as talking about time, if I slip, I'm usually in Eastern Time Zone, simply because that's standardized on NYSE. But these ranges, these thresholds, they're not predictions. It's not saying, well, if price gets to this point, you're going to have a reversal, or if price gets to this point, it's going to shoot past it. These are not predictions, but what they are is that they're general, and yes, I am peeking in the chat. I try to take a look at the chat when I'm giving this chat. I try. I can't do the best job at it, but I try to relay as much as possible. I try to peek over when I can. These price thresholds, right? They're ranges of interest. And the most interesting thing that from talking with traders that I've learned is that these pivot points, they are points of interest because so many other traders are looking at the same points of interest. So in other words, if you get, let's suppose you had 1,000 people all looking at pivot points or all trading off pivot points. That's 1,000 people whose trading decision is biased by the value of the pivot point. So the decisions that they're going to make on whether to buy or sell a stock, or whether to hold it, or whether to liquidate, etc., those decisions are going to be affected by the pivot points. Now, let's say you have 10,000 people looking at those same pivot points. 10 times more people are going to be using the same information to make a decision. That means the impact of the pivot point becomes 10 times more relevant, because whatever impact that has on the direction of the stock, because people are trading this, and by trading you are affecting the price movement in some small way. The more people that look at the pivot points, the more these pivot values will manifest themselves in the price. And what you're giving yourself is a bias. And this actually does, in my opinion, show up. Take a look at these pivot points. Now, these are the shadow trader pivot points. There's other flavors of pivot points, right? But look at the trading activity just on the Qs today. R1 stands for the first resistance level. Now, when price moves through resistance, that means it becomes more and more difficult to continue moving against the resistance. You always have this market where people are interested in buying and selling the stock. You can't have the price move up forever because there's going to be no sellers on that side. And you can't have the price move down forever because there's going to be no buyers. Unless something is fundamentally wrong with, say, a company, the stock price is not going to go to zero. Because as I always say this, even if, especially if you're a corporation, right? Part of your company, and I always find this very enlightening, part of your company includes the publicly owned assets of that company. And if that company owns a building, if they own furniture, if they own land, all of these things are worth something, not to mention intangibles such as infrastructure and logistics. These are worth something. And the very fact that no one's going to throw away a gold watch means that the stock price, especially if you're shorting, as long as you're watching it, the stock price is not going to go to zero. It will only go to zero if something is fundamentally wrong, and this will usually show up in news, and you generally have a long time to react to this. This market, however, manifests itself with support and resistance, and these price thresholds are one measurement of support and resistance. So what happened today on QQQQ, 3Qs, is that we breached resistance 1, and it got halfway from R1 to R2. And that's significant because we got further and further, deeper into resistance. Now R3 was quite a ways away, but what happened was the market decided at around 10 o'clock that halfway between these two resistance values, it's time to change direction. And again, this is not a prediction. It's not caused by the pivot points. This is it just happened, and the pivot points happen to be a measuring stick demonstrating certain price thresholds. And it kind of happens. At around the first resistance point, you'll notice there's a little bit of uncertainty. It was moving up for 15 minutes straight. Price was moving up. Some very healthy green bars, and all of a sudden you have two red bars in a row. And you see this uncertainty? This bar opened, it went all the way up here, and it went all the way back down here. So you have relative volatility at this resistance level. Now, it ultimately decides, it picks a direction, right? It goes up for the next 15 minutes. Something intrinsic in the market happens, it changes direction, and now look what happens at this other resistance point. You have another period of general uncertainty. People don't know is the trend going to continue? Are we going to continue to stay bullish? Or was this a real reversal? Was it a dip in movement, etc.? The pivots give you ideas about where the price action is, and they study this in detail on Shadow Trader, and more importantly, they will point out to you as it happens when the when the important moments happen in the market. See, I'm looking at this, and for purposes of illustration about TradeVision, I'm just kind of showing you, I'm just kind of fitting this example, right? I just picked QQQ and I'm fitting this example. This may or may not be a good example. I like the way it lines up around here, but guys on Shadow Trader will give you more in-depth analysis. That's why that whole conversation is why pivots are so important to Prodigio, because when you're trying to make rapid trading decisions, and of course this applies to day trading, but it applies to swing trading as well. Picking your optimal buy and sell points, or ones that are reasonable, can make all the difference in the world. Picking your entry points, and if these decisions incorporate some of the very simple concepts that I just went over, such as pivot points or 10 o'clock or whatever, that can cover your commission. That can be the difference between a winning and a losing trade. The key pivots gives you a broad view of some of the most important stocks, and it provides a matrix actually, which shows you what pivot points have been breached and what points haven't. So let me take a broad look at this. Let's say I'm watching this, and if you have a multi-monitor setup, you can go in a layout, select layout, and click advanced layout. It tells me, okay, I'm going into advanced layout. I can always reset it, and I click OK, continue. I can either drag this out, or I can right click and say floating. Now I'm not going to do it because I'm doing the chat here, but if you have a multi-monitor setup, you can detach TradeVision and put it on another monitor. You can have this matrix view available to you, and this, if you look closely, will tell you, and let me unclick these highlights, what support and resistance points have been breached. So for example, a lot of these key pivots hit R1 today, because as we noticed in the market indices, it's generally bullish. Now it might be reversing. I'll leave that for the analysts to decide. But what had happened, as evidenced by QQQ here, is that it started off very bullish and it breached R1. You can see this in a one glimpse shot by going to TradeVision, and you see the blue outlines. Any column that has a blue outlines tells me that this R1 has been breached. And what's interesting is if I look at gold, GLD, the opposite effect happens. You've probably been noticing the inverse relationship on market movement versus, say, the precious metals. If the economics, and the financials are weakening, the precious metals, or the unchanging kind of, gold is not created or destroyed in mass quantities. There's only a certain amount of gold in the world, and we have to mine. Very difficult to dig it out of the ground. But it's not like you can just make a factory that makes gold. It's very hard to get. You see this inverse relationship kind of happens, and you see this did the opposite. It dipped down below S1, and now it's reversing, right? Now everybody always likes having gold, so I'm sure there's kind of a bias here for it to go long, but it breached S1. You see this in TradeVision, and I can just see this at a glance. So I don't have to go tirelessly looking through charts and changing symbols. I can just capture all of these at the same time, right? And now, here's another one, TLT, right? Oops. That's okay, 20-year Treasury bond fund, right? So this is looking at 20-year Treasury, and there's some interest in purchasing this right now. So this kind of had the same general behavior. You can use the key pivots in order to get a relative broad view of what's going on, and then you can click over and it'll give you a more specific view. There's 3 different kinds of pivots. Up here you can change them, and this will change them. These are all different formulas, all different flavors, and see they have different they have different criterion, right? So I just clicked on Woody's pivots, and these are Woody's pivots. this has a slightly different formula than, say, Camarillas or shadow traders. You'll notice that shadow traders looks a lot like Woody's. I believe there's a lot of similarity in the thinking. I think there's a lot of parallels. They're not identical, as you can tell. See, look at XHB. See, that hit R1 on the shadow trader. It did not hit R1 on the Woody's here. But you can just toggle between these, and Camarillas is obviously a lot more tight. Right? Let's look at SMH here. SMH, see, these are a lot more tight. The trading activity really bounced around, and it broke through all these levels. That's how you can take advantage of key pivots. And of course, whenever I click any of these buttons, it's hot loaded into the Prodigio order entry system. So if I want to make quick decisions, right, I can just quite simply use the order entry because it's tied right in, and I can also trade off of the chart using some of the auto send functionality. Auto send lets you do kind of one-click ordering, right? So I can say buy 100 shares, and I might want to buy it if it comes back down to R2 here. So I can click here. See that dashed line? It puts a limit order to buy, and then if I take auto send off, if I want to tweak this, I can zoom in, and I can just drag and drop it, and I can change the order just like that. And that'll of course show up in my order book as a working order. So I could cancel it here, or instead I could just go to the Chart Trader Pro, right click and say, okay, cancel that guy. Right, now that's out. You can create your own pivots in Wizard Lab. What you would do is you would actually create the formulas based on the arithmetic, and we give you kind of the Woody's pivots, etc. under technical analysis. Shadow Trader and Woody's are available here so that you can create logic which is capable, here's the Parsons pivots, capable of making real-time trading decisions. You can populate those into the TradeOptics queue. Now ultimately we'll allow you to kind of define these formulas. You can't do that yet for this grid display, but that's an example of one of the directions that we're pushing the platform in. Most importantly though, you can use these pivots, and most people use these pivots, so you want to be using these same pivots as well, right? For those very reasons, and 10,000 people looking at these pivots is probably a gross underestimation, right? There's probably many more than 10,000 people looking at these same pivot points. You want to look at shadow traders, Woody's, and Camarillas in order to find out what other people are thinking as well. Yes, here's a good question. The Prodigio orders and the TOS orders are unified, right? Except for platform-held orders. Those are like stops and trailing stops and things. But if you send market or limit orders, the two systems communicate with each other. They're backed by the same account and obviously the same clearing, etc. If you place an order on Prodigio, that's as good as an order on TOS. And if you place an order on TOS, it'll show up in the order books in Prodigio. They're seamlessly integrated. Okay, my pivots is the same concept as the key pivots, but you can just type in any symbol that you want in here. I actually don't have QQQ. I can just type that right in, and it's saying, all right, I'm looking at shadow traders pivots, and here's the pivot points. I can click here, and it'll show me the pivots on the chart, and I can do that for any symbol. So you can hook up TradeVision to be looking at any symbol that you want. And just try to pick something off the top of my head. I always make fun of myself because I always say, being a software developer, I only know tech stocks, right? Right. So okay. So here's Intel. You can just type it right into TradeVision, and now I'm looking at the pivots of the tech stocks. And Chart Trader Pro and the order entry are all seamlessly integrated. So that is a synopsis of TradeVision, how important key pivots are, what you can do with it as a scanning system, and so that you can perform scans based on your own criterion. That is the project and projects that we're working on right now basically open this up to you. Now, I had alluded previously to the TradeOptics. Right? Now, TradeOptics, before when I discussed it, I mentioned that this is your real-time trade alert queue. And the idea behind this is that all of these rules that you create in Wizard Lab, when I make these rules, this compiles into kind of an intermediate language. In other words, you're writing code, but you're not actually writing code. And it takes that code, and there's a simple set of rules that say how these Prodigio rules should be working with one another. And we take that package, we call it a strategy, and when it's time to run the scans, we send this up to our servers. The servers perform scans, right? And what this is doing is, A, it's hooked up to the high frequency data feed, right? So in other words, it's much faster than when you have running a client machine and you're getting ticks and quotes. It's hooked up to really the professional grade type of data feed, the kinds that you really can't purchase these unless you're like a big time kind of vendor or whatever. You're creating a strategy. It hooks into that feed. It runs on the server, and it crunches the numbers faster than my client machine that I'm using right now, much faster than this can handle. What it does is it generates signals, and those signals for an automated trading system define the entries and the exits. But what's probably more important is that you can just get the raw signal. Prodigio is such an amazing system because what I'm doing here, the system's actually auto trading on me. Right? I have this set up, and these positions, they actually opened up a while ago. This is a paper money account, and I had this set up, and this picked some positions based on EMA crosses. The system is robotically managing these, and this is the full potential of the system. The computer can do this much faster than a human can do this. Quite simply because you can't physically place that many orders all at the same time. I mean, the computer can do this on the micro to nano scale second when you talk in terms of time. It can do things on, even if you just say millisecond scale, right? Although the system as a whole, it's more along the order of microseconds, and the actual routing systems, I believe, are more on the order of nanoseconds. Human can't trade that fast. I mean, we can't even hit a 95 mile an hour fastball, and that gets to the plate in something like 300 milliseconds. That's an eternity for a computer. 300 milliseconds. That's a long time for a computer to do something. The robotic trading of the system is the full potential of Prodigio. But, especially if you're just refining a trading strategy, you can use TradeOptics to perform what I like to call a semi-automation. And this semi-automation, it takes just the scanning rule of your strategy. So I was showing you before, I was playing around with this ADX rule. And if I open up my ADX strategy, which uses that ADX rule, notice one of these rules is the scanning rule. That's the entry rule. If I were to deploy this in robotic trading, it would wait until it found a signal based on that rule for any of those symbols in my deployment list. Let's say, I'm robotically trading 10 symbols because I know these 10 symbols very well, which, by the way, is a very smart strategy for robotic trading. A lot of people will know very well, especially if you're day traders, will intimately study, say, 10 stocks. They'll A, use a scan to find those 10 stocks, and B, study in close detail the behavior of those stocks. They'll learn things like at 10 o'clock there tends to be reversals, or this stock tends to trend heavily in one direction, etc., etc. If you take these 10 symbols, and if you go to your quotes panel and you build, I'm going to call this, I'm actually going to say make a new list, and I'm going to change this name to my known list, right? This is my known list. These are the ones I really know, and I mentioned before, right? Tech guys only know tech stocks, right? There's an ETF, right? So I save my known list, right? And there's 5 stocks that I know very well. I can deploy a scan on this list, which I called my known list. Right, so I saved that, and that's actually available here now. Here it is, my known list. If I go to the TradeOptics tab, and step 4 of Wizard Lab, this points you back to that tab. So that's all that is, just a link over to that tab. I can go down and deploy my ADX strategy. Right? So what was it? Was this a long or a short? This was a long strategy. It's on the buy side. So if I go down into ADX, and I got to look this up. We're planning on kind of reorganizing this panel so it's easier to use. But here's my ADX strategy. I like to pick the list first, right? Because notice right now it's not deployed, right? If it's unchecked, it's not scanning. If it's checked, it's scanning. I like to do this in one step. If I hit the check, it's going to deploy it on the S&P 100. So I like to pick the list first. I like to go down to my known list and then scan it. Now, behind the scenes, it sent that strategy to the server. It deployed it, it's running, and it's now scanning those 5 stocks for the signals. If I collapse this, I can see the signals come into the system as the system finds the results of those scans. So you see what just happened here. I just got a burst on the next minute. I have a couple 1-minute based strategies. I'm running one called EMA cross and one called LR channel cross. Now I just picked a bunch of strategies for illustration, but the system will be scanning this, and when you get a signal, it'll tell you this signal. And of course you can sort these tables. Here's a little tip. Right now you see this arrow is pointing down. This is just like something that you would use in, say, a spreadsheet program or whatever. If I click, see it's pointing up, now it's pointing down, now it goes away. You can sort by strategy, by pattern, by time, by symbol. And here's the trick that most people probably don't know about. You can sort by more than one column. You have to hold Control down, but if I hold Control and click, see how it creates a number 2 here? So I'm sorting first by time, second by strategy pattern. Right? I could change that. Right? I could clear this by just clicking. Right? I could sort first by strategy and pattern, and you see these times, 1243, 1247, 1248. I can sort those by time, and now it's going to group these together. Right? So here's all my EMA crosses grouped together by time, and here's all of my upper BB short ones grouped together by time. You could do it by symbol as well, and you could find, say, duplicates, because sometimes you get duplicate signals. Really gives you control on how your strategy works when you can see the behavior of the rule, if it's firing double signals, etc. And of course, you can always tweak strategies to have things like cool-off periods. We built that on a suggestion from one of our traders. It was a really great idea. But this is your TradeOptics queue. And so I'll put that back in. And as the signals come into the system, they're available for you to just take a quick look at it. And so here's an EMA cross signal. I have this very, very short time frame EMA cross strategy that's looking at 2 different periods of EMA crosses, and if it does something, it kind of fires a signal. This, obviously, it went down and went back up, so this is a cross above, which is why it's a bull signal. It's going to be, I believe it's like 3-minute EMAs. See, I'm looking at 5-minute bars. Let me look at 1-minute bars. And let's actually open that up really quick for purposes of illustration. I can say open, and this is going to be a rule using the EMA cross. Right, now this is a bidirectional cross. It'll cross either direction. It's looking at a 3-minute and a 6-minute exponential moving average. Let me just double check the EMA cross, make sure I'm looking at the right rule. And I should be. Yeah, okay, so that's looking at the right rule. So it's a 3 crossing a 6. And I can just double check. I'm looking at a 20 period. Let's change that to 6, my long term. And hit done there. And I'll throw up another study, EMA. Sorry, exponential moving average. And tweak those parameters so that it's 3 periods. And I always like to make these a little thicker. Depends on how you want to look at it, but I like making it a little bit thicker. And so what happened here was when this yellow line crossed over the white line, it gave me a long signal, and it said my EMA cross happened right as soon as this crosses over this line, right? And so that could be a bullish signal. It depends on my trading strategy, my trading idea. That's what's so wonderful about TradeOptics, is that it allows you to scan with no commitment to trading. You can use your own judgment and your own intuition and knowledge of the market to semi-automate a strategy, right? And the reason why I say this is because there's certain things that you probably can never automate, right? You probably can never automate how you feel about a stock, right? Think about this for a moment. You definitely feel differently about different stocks, different equities, different instruments, etc. I feel a lot differently about, say, a gold ETF than I feel about, say, a financial stock. Now, I'm not talking in terms of whether I like them or don't like them. I'm just saying that I have different intuition on those instruments because they're independent of one another. They have fundamental relationships, but they're independent. Certain things you can't automate, right? So we can't really measure, how much you like a stock. But you can use this system in order to take the technical analysis and perform these scans on your symbol lists and populate a range of ideas. You can then apply your intuition and your instinct. You can apply the way that you feel about the instrument. And I think I have forming bar on this one. In order to make kind of a final judgment about whether or not that's a good or a bad decision. See, like I look at this and I say to myself, well, okay, I mean, there's some really good support here. This stock in particular, it didn't really reverse the way that, say, the QQQ reversed. There might be, this might be a good time to buy the stock. Maybe, it depends on what my judgment is, right? And I'm not giving you a judgment because I can't know without having studied this, but having studied these stocks, you can apply your final judgment by combining the automation from the TradeOptics and using your own logic and your own intuition in order to trade something. And it becomes very simple. If I want to buy this stock, it's populated BMY, and if I want to get in, send a limit order at market, and that filled right away. And so now I'm long, and it gives me a message on my chart trader approach says I'm long BMY at 29.76. Then of course you can manage it, and it shows up in your portfolio, and when you're ready to close it, just go ahead and close it and you're out. And so Prodigio has a lot of different tools that you can use both for scanning and for real-time trade idea generation. And I see it looks like I'm going to get a question in from the chat, actually. Waiting for that to come in. Stocks to options. We're actually working on options feeds right now so that you can use the options in real-time trading decisions. So that's one of the things that's kind of coming. We're kind of working on that. One thing that you're definitely going to have in the next build is some Forex data, because we've basically developed that, and it's just such a small universe of stocks. It's really easy to get in, actually. Let's see. I was looking in for some question here. Difference between shadow trader pivots versus the floor pivots. Really, it's just the formula. The shadow trader pivots uses its own unique twist on the formula. And one of the things that the shadow trader does is it looks at equity trading activity for futures. You should really ask the shadow trader guys what the philosophy is on that. But it's definitely a little different, but it's definitely interesting and telling, and we've worked with a lot of people who say that they really like what these shadow trader pivots do. So if you're more interested in the details on the shadow trader pivots, send in a question to those guys, especially if you're on the newsletter. You can always ask the shadow trader, but join them in on the chat, and they're always ready to entertain questions, things like that. So Prodigio can be used in many different ways. It can be used as a scanning system. We're enhancing the things that you can do with the scanning system so that you can provide your own parameters, etc., etc. Yes, we're constantly working on. We actually had a meeting today where we talked about doing some further development on the strategies, on the studies, etc., etc. There's a lot of fundamental things we're doing as well, such as making improvements to charts and things like that. But it's an ever-evolving platform, and so hopefully what you got today out of today's chat is a little bit of ideas about what you can do with the TradeVision, using the advancers and decliners, more importantly using the key pivots in order to find opportunity in the market. And yes, we're building futures, and we actually, to get the futures in, Prodigio had always started as a day trading platform, and we've expanded it since. And so we had some difficulty with futures scheduling, and we actually just wrapped that up. We actually just finished that. So the next build should be able to do futures scanning, actually. But the TradeVision, use the key pivots, use your My Pivots so that you can just type in any symbol that you want. And more importantly, the heart and soul of Prodigio is its ability to define scans on the market. So you can go in a wizard lab, build a rule, set it up to scan a symbolist, populate TradeOptics, and trade right from there. Right? So short, short, short. System just told me to short, so I'm shorting. Right? Boom. I filled. I went short. I liked this because I saw the big up move, and maybe this will go back down. I don't know. Pure speculation. Pure speculation. But hopefully that demonstrates how easy it is to use TradeOptics and to get in a position so rapidly. Okay. Any other questions, especially ones about account activation or trading, etc.? Send in those questions. Hopefully some of the guys will answer some of these in the chat. Go to prodigiorts.net and check out the video archives. But any questions can be sent in to prodigio@thinkorswim.com. Those guys on the desk are great. They work really hard, and they get tons of questions. So they'll get back to you as soon as they can. If you need a little bit more immediate assistance, try to find somebody inside this chat room. We're usually here during the day. And of course, you can always go onto the forums on prodigiorts.net and follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/wizardlab. And that's it. I'm going to wrap up today's show. And thank you everybody for joining me today. My name is Brian Wagner. I am the Chief Architect of Prodigio RTS, and I hope you all have a great week and a great trading day. Everybody take care, and I will see you next week at the same time, same channel. All right, thanks a lot, guys. Take care.